Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Let's Talk TEFL podcast. I'm Jackie, and joining me is Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer, how are you?
I'm good. I'm fine, thank you. And you?
I'm also fine, thank you. All right. Today we are going to talk about what to do when you're not at your best. So you might not be at your best for, like various reasons. Like you have a physical thing going on, or you have a mental health issue, or maybe you're just a little burnt out from teaching. There's various reasons. It can be hard to be like 100% on all the time. So we're going to talk about kind of those very realistic situations when you're maybe not at your best and you just have to get through the class and without exhausting yourself too much. And this happened to
Yeah,
me a lot when I was in Korea. There's basically no sick days in Korea. People just
no.
drag themselves to wherever they're going, even if they're very, very sick. So I want to say teaching in Korean universities for 10 years, I maybe canceled classes like 3 days out of 10 years or something like that. That was when I was like literally couldn't get out of bed. I've had to deal with this situation a lot of times. Jennifer, how about you? Did you
Oh,
ever drag yourself to class when you were on your deathbed, essentially?
um, 100%. Yes. I think I called in sick maybe twice, but definitely I worked at schools where if you were not in the hospital, then you better be in class. And when I say in the hospital, I literally mean that you should be an inpatient if you are not in class.
Sleeping
Um,
overnight, yes.
yeah. And also, I taught at schools that you had to find and pay your replacement if you could
Ooh.
not come to class. So if you woke up and you're like, oh my God, I'm dying, I have to go to the hospital or I have to go to a clinic, like right now, I have to go see a doctor. Um, you also had to make time to find someone to cover your
Hmm.
classes, which was
Which is the
a
last
super,
thing you need.
yeah, it's the last thing you need. And also, like, who are you going to call? You know?
Everyone's working already. All your
Yeah,
friends are at work, most
yeah,
likely. Okay, so we're going to talk about what to do when you're not at your best. So the first idea we have is to pre-record some videos of a lesson or parts of a lesson to use in class. Um, this is something that requires like a little bit of actually a lot of these ideas require
yeah.
some kind of like preparation beforehand. But if
Yes,
you are go ahead.
these ideas are not that super helpful for when you're just dying and you still have to go to class because on those days, let's be honest, just drag yourself there and put your head down and give the kids some crayons. You know? if,
Yes,
if you work for
exactly.
a school
Mm.
that is that brutal, then you know it
Just put
sucks
on a movie
to
and just chill
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Exactly. So yeah, we're kind of talking about more like you're a little bit burnt out or you're like have some mental health issues or maybe you broke your leg and you're finding it like just a struggle just to like get to class and that's all the energy you have in your day, that kind of thing. So yeah, the first one is to pre-record a video of a lesson or parts of the lesson. If you teach the same lesson a million times, um, it can be helpful to kind of record that little like mini lesson, kind of where you teach the grammar, especially explicitly, or you teach the vocabulary explicitly. And yeah, I like it because you can really like hone it down to its most essential or the core thing that you're actually trying to teach. And it can be helpful for students to see and hear you kind of in a different format. It's a little bit the novelty factor of it, not you standing up in the classroom talking, but it's you on a video talking. And yeah, so Jennifer, have you done this before in your lessons?
um, I have not, but I know some other people who have, and um, students these days are so used to looking at screens. They've always got their phone, and they're on their phone if they're not, you know, actively doing something else in a way that kids in years past really didn't have the opportunity to do. So they're so used to seeing stuff on a screen that even if it's
Mhm.
something like watching a grammar lesson, or
Mhm.
watching the instructions for an activity or whatever, just it increases their interest and attention.
And
So
I would
yeah.
add that on YouTube, you can actually find other teachers who've taught the very same thing that you're teaching. So just have a look. And yeah, sometimes, like once in a while, just to mix it up, I've used a video from another teacher teaching, for example, um, like can or can't, or like irregular past tense verbs, or just something like that. And yeah, so I've used that as kind of like the lecture instead of me lecturing. And yeah, it was just a little bit of a nice change of pace for the students and just to hear like a different perspective or view. So not all the time. Obviously, you have to like teach the students
Yeah.
sometimes too, but for once in a while, if you're not at your best, you
Yeah. And
use the resources out there.
yes, and also I would say in favor of occasionally using little clips of other teachers teaching some point. It's not just input from other teachers or another teacher's viewpoint, whatever, because obviously you could watch the video and then you could recreate it. Um, but giving your students a chance to hear other native speakers, if
Mm-hmm.
they don't have the opportunity to get lots of different experience with accent, then it can be helpful for them to hear other people speaking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So the next idea that you have are stations. So Jennifer, I think you have way more experience with this. So what do you mean
Yeah.
by stations?
So stations are when each table is a small group, but also each table is doing a different activity. And so after a set period of time, the students will actually go work at a different table, and you can set it up however works for you. So some different ways that you can set it up is, all of the students move together and they move like in a set pattern, like maybe every table moves, one table clockwise. Or if you want to give the students a little more flexibility and give them a little more agency, you can have more stations than the students will complete in the class period. So, for example, if
Mm.
the time that you're setting for them to spend at each station means that they will work at, 4 stations during the course of the lesson, then have, 5, 6, or 7 stations. And then the students can, according to the available seats at each one, have a little more flexibility in deciding what they're going to work on. And then at each station, you might have one station where it is silent reading time, or you might have stations, with some task cards or, a game that the students can play together. So it can be small group activities, or they can just be sitting in the same location working on the same activity, but not really interacting that much. And I think it's good to have a mix. So, the students can get that interaction with each other and work on things collaboratively, which I find is always, well, generally speaking, more useful than just doing a bunch of silent activities. But if they are working where they're communicating with each other, there is less pressure on you. And then you can spend your time going between the stations where the students are working on something where they might need your feedback, or they might need a little bit more closer monitoring in terms of
Mm-hmm.
they have more scope of getting things wrong.
Mm. I like that a lot. It does require some prep time, but if you can use those kind of like table activities or whatever for multiple classes and multiple lessons, then I think it's worth the time. And it's one of those things you can kind of just have as like an emergency last minute kind of thing. And it's a nice entire class period that doesn't require a ton of effort from you once it's set up. So yeah, definitely give that a try, I think. Um, so the next one that we have is small group work. So the lesson is more student directed, and task-based learning actually fits super well into this. So setting up a task for the students to do, maybe if we're talking, for example, about food, one thing that I used to do is I would like, or actually, like, yeah, when we were talking about, oh no, travel's a better one. This is what I used to do with my students. So I would like explain a little bit about my parents, and I would show the students a picture of my parents, explain about their hobbies, and say they like walking, but they're like 70, so they can't like walk around for hours. And then I would get them to choose I'd put students into groups of 4 or 5 and get them to choose a place in Korea and pretend that they were tour guides and kind of design a whole little itinerary for my parents. And I said they don't really like spicy food and like all that kind of stuff. So students would have to work together for 20 or 30 minutes and kind of come up with a little plan, then do a little like short presentation about their recommendation for my parents if they were coming to visit Korea. And so something like that, it's like if you set that up well, and you're really not at your best, you can monitor, like kind of circulate around the class, but you're not actually on stage the whole time. The students are actually doing most of the work in that kind of lesson. And yeah, so every once in a while, I used to love doing stuff like that because it actually was a good break for me, but it was also a good break from the students, for the students as well. And it was an interesting way to learn about all that travel vocabulary and kind of words they could use, the grammar they could use to explain that. But it wasn't me explicitly like teaching all of that. They could kind of discover what they wanted to. And I, of course, I'd give it a little bit of feedback after the presentations. And yeah, so like a lesson like that, I think, is way easier on the teacher in a lot of ways than a very teacher-centered lesson.
Yeah, yeah, and those do require a bit of planning, but there are lots of resources available online if you are looking to get more into project-based learning. And it really is so motivating for the students when they're kind of in charge of, what they're putting together for their final piece of work. And for the most part, in my experience, students work pretty well together on those kind of groups because it's not the dreaded out of class project where it ends up, being one person who feels like they've done all the work, whether they have or not. If they're doing it in class, it is generally pretty good, and students pretty much pretty universally enjoy it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So another idea kind of related to that is getting students to do presentations. I know students often hate presentations, but I used to make my, in my speaking and conversation classes, I taught English majors. So they were actually quite good at speaking English. And so I would always do one presentation project each semester. And the topic I chose was like current events. So anything happening in Korea or around the world. And students were just free to choose literally like any currents, like something in the news recently. And they'd have to just kind of give a summary of what it was about and then why it's important. And then also their kind of opinion or thought about that. And I just did very short ones. The max would be like 2 minutes per person. And I also let students go alone. I let them go in groups if they wanted. It was totally flexible and up to them. And they would have to make like one PowerPoint slide to kind of go along with it with an image or just a title or whatever. So people could kind of see what they did. And presentations are just actually a really nice way to kind of see like get to know students a little bit more and find out their opinions and thoughts about things. And also as a teacher, it's actually just such a nice break to not be talking. And I think the students liked it as well. Like they were very interested in what the other students were saying. And I think it was just silent. Like there was no issues with people on their phone. Nobody was chatting during the presentations. Like they were interested in it too, to hear kind of their classmates' thoughts or opinions about stuff. So that's a really nice, like I always called it the mental health break, the day that I did presentations in class for me and for the students as well. So yeah, if you have high enough level students that it's not painful, then yeah, consider doing it. I think for very low level students, it's painful. Like, my name is Jackie. I have a sister. I like pizza. And it's like over and over again. It's kind of mind numbing. But yeah, with higher level students, it's a great idea.
Yeah, with lower level students, it is sort of mind numbing to have to listen to when everybody, like, it's very much like a fill in the blank Mad Libs sort of thing. But it's that still, I feel like, is good for the students to sort of get their confidence up. And I will concur with Jackie that presentations with higher level students, the students in the audience were rapt the students giving the presentations, I mean, you can pretty much tell the second or third lesson that you deal with some students, how they are going to react to a presentation. The really shy ones who never talk above a whisper or whatever, well, they're going to do that at the front of the class as well. And the ones who are happy to chatter away with their broken English, they will do the same. And obviously the ones that are more fluent, they can do quite a good job. So for the students that are actually at the front of the class doing the presenting, you will have quite a lot of students who don't enjoy public speaking, just like the rest of the world. But the students watching tend to really get into it. I found it quite surprising. But I will say one tip, if you find that, or you suspect that your students may not be that interested in what the other students are saying, you can give them all a rubric of how the other students do, like a little checklist of things for them to listen for or whatever, which again is more prep work for you. But if you think that it's going to be like a rowdy madhouse and you're just trying to listen to one student, then giving everybody a task to have at all times can be helpful.
For sure. And then presentations, one thing that I used to do is I would do like a little mini lesson about presentation skills. So like make eye contact and how to make eye contact and like things like gestures and where to stand and how to put your hands and like things like that. And it was actually really helpful because we all were kind of working from the same page. And I could tell that students were like taking that on. And like I actually made students memorize their presentation, and so they weren't allowed to read from a note card, which was actually super helpful. But I let them have the note card in their pocket, and I said they could take it out and look one time in case of emergency, and I wouldn't penalize them. So I mean, they had something that they could look at if like desperate times. But making students memorize actually was so much better in terms of the quality of the presentations, for sure.
Yes, definitely. You don't want students that are just reading off of their piece of paper in a monotone,
terrible,
a whisper. And I think one more tip for the audience is if you ask them each to prepare one follow-up question, and then you randomly choose 2 or 3 students at the end of each presentation to ask their follow-up question.
Yeah, that's also, I've done that with some great success as well. Have used that. All right, so the next one is to have in-class silent, extensive reading and or writing. So when I taught academic writing, I used to start off each class and I'd get students to practice writing fluently. So often we focus on accuracy in reading and writing, actually, like understanding every word that you're reading, writing very carefully without grammar mistakes. But this is a nice way to focus on fluency. So the first 10 minutes of class, I'd give students a prompt, and their goal was just to write quickly without a cell phone, without anything, just in their notebooks, and to try to not like write as quickly as possible, but just to kind of pick up the pace a little bit faster than they would normally write. And then I got them to count up the number of lines they wrote and kind of keep a graph throughout each day during the semester, and just kind of see if they were improving their writing speed. So it was kind of just like this fun challenge. And I didn't give them any grades for it. It was just an activity that we did in class. Or no, maybe I give them like 5 points or something, just they either did it or didn't, but like everybody did it. So it was just like 5 free points the students would get. But that's also a nice kind of just break for the teacher, just to have a few minutes in class when the students are doing all the hard work. And you aren't necessarily, but I would do the writing prompt as well quite often. So I would do it along with my students. And it was, kind of fun just to like all be doing the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. And that is a really good way to model for the students. If it's silent reading time, or if it's writing time, and you are at your desk also reading a book or also writing in your notebook, then that helps keep them on track a little bit better.
Okay, so the next one, let's talk about self-care and boundaries. So Just one thing for my first year in Korea, I was super excited to be in Korea. So I would travel around Korea every weekend and go on all these trips. And then by the time I got to the classroom on Monday morning, I was burnt out and like exhausted from my weekend of activities. So like, I mean, it wasn't ideal, and it was a struggle to get through the week. And as I was in Korea for longer, I would like kind of try to just, have some downtime on the weekends for sure. Like especially Sunday night, I would just try to be at home and get to bed early enough and maybe like pick up some groceries for the week and that kind of thing. So self-care is important, especially if you're struggling. And yeah, going out every night, like super late drinking and stuff like that is tough if you're not doing well. It's not going to help you feel better to do those things. What is going to help you feel better is to like eat healthy and sleep enough. And if it's a mental health issue, definitely like explore some online counseling or something like that. And yeah, so stuff like that I think is important for sure. Jennifer, how about
Yes.
you? What do you think?
No, I think self-care is very important and not one size fits all. I know some people for self-care, they will, have a little time each day where they've got some candles lit and there's no overhead light, and then that kind of gets them in a better mood. And I know some people that like to go run for an hour and that makes them feel better.
Hmm.
And neither of those speak to my heart. Um,
Hmm.
you know, the light source doesn't bother me, but like a lack of sun bothers me. So
Hmm.
for my self-care, living in England now, I've got a really bright lamp that um, can be used as like a grow lamp for plants. And also, I
Hmm.
just have it near my desk because the brightness of it really makes a noticeable difference in my mood. So,
Hmm. And then
yeah.
boundaries. The thing with boundaries, there's always your school is always going to want you to do a whole bunch of stuff outside of your regular teaching hours. And I mean, I was always, my rule about it is that I would generally say yes if it wasn't like a major inconvenience. If it was just kind of a one off, like I could do it in 5 or 10 minutes and it wasn't actually like stressful or annoying, I would do it. And it's like, I just think that's part of any job. You just say yes to some things and it's like fine. But I would often say no to things like, oh, hey, can you like just do this like proofread my whole thesis statement or my whole like thesis or whatever for my wife, or can you teach my kids on every Saturday, or like things like that. I just was Yeah, I would say no to a lot of those things. And it's fine. It's actually fine to say no to things that are like very not in your job description, and just do it kindly. But then I noticed there was always some of my colleagues that would say yes to all that stuff. So they were the ones that got a million things piled upon them, and they were burnt out and exhausted and stressed out. And I was always just happy it wasn't me, but it wasn't me because I would say no to
Yeah.
the more unreasonable things, especially the unpaid, unreasonable things that would require a ton of my time. So
Yes.
yeah, be careful. Be careful what you say yes to, but say yes to some easy things so people don't think that you're like unreasonable and
Yes.
unhelpful.
Yes. Say yes to some things to keep the group happy or whatever, show you're a team player. But depending on the culture where you are, like in Korea, um, it's it was very much a thing of like it's not bad or wrong to try to push a little and get a little bit more and a little bit more. Like you would see it if you were at a market and the old lady next to you would badger the poor girl working behind the counter to put a little extra meat in after she had already waited and printed out the sticker. Like it's just sort
Mm-hmm.
of a cultural thing where you always want that little bit extra. And in the workplace, what that means is there will be people who have a friend who has a dissertation that they need to be proofread and it's due on Monday. And so, of course, you'll want to spend the weekend reading their poorly written broken English.
Google translated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um, uh, those sorts of things. And I think it is important to say no to the stuff sometimes just on principle. So like they don't think that that's something that they can ask you.
Hmm.
For example, I did have a guy who interrupted my class one day that I didn't know. He just knew that I was a foreigner in the school, and he came and was like, "Here's my thesis. I need you to correct it." And I just
Mm.
very politely said, "No, thank you." And he
Yeah.
was quite angry, and I think he took it out on my Korean coworker, but
Yeah.
tough.
I had like a little mantra that I would always I say all the time still. Actually, it's like one of my life mantras is your emergency is not my emergency.
Yes,
So I don't like fall into the urgent, it has to happen now. And I just think like, well, you should have like planned ahead so you're not in this
yes,
shitty situation. And I don't want to be stressed out helping you out of this situation that's entirely not my problem. Unless it's like
yeah,
my BFF or, you know, whatever, a family member or
yeah,
something, then yes, of course I'm willing to help. But if it's some random person that I don't have a relationship with, then I am under no obligation to help that person get out of that emergency. That's something they've created on their own. And there's actually no English teaching emergencies. That's also what I would say. So
yes,
like don't fall into the trap of this is like an urgent crazy thing because you're teaching a language. You're not saving somebody's life or putting out a fire or like any of that stuff. So it's important, but it's not like life or death important. So don't fall into that kind of thinking. It never is life or death, actually, with someone who needs your help for an English related thing.
yeah. Although I would say if you have a coworker who is sick and has to find their own replacement, and you could fill in for them for one of their or more of their classes, then that is a nice
Mm-hmm.
thing to do. Although
Mm-hmm.
I have had to set up boundaries with that in the past, where it would be the same coworker that was always sick on Monday or whatever, and then there's never any payback because you couldn't take off, just
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So yeah, be
Exactly.
clear with your boundaries and set them early and reinforce them often.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, Jennifer, I think that might be a good place to end it. So those I hope are helpful ideas for when you're not at your best. And I think the key takeaway for me is self-care and boundaries to me are kind of the most important ones. And then also creating a student-centered teaching environment. So you're not on the stage all the time doing all the things. The students should be doing the hard work and not you necessarily all the time. What so like what are your kind of key things, Jennifer, out of this?
Yeah, totally. And I think part of developing as a teacher is knowing what you have to do and knowing what the students are capable of doing with your guidance. But
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to be, the fountain of knowledge pouring into their empty wells. Give them the
Mm-hmm.
tools they need and let them go with that. And then you can just monitor them and
Mm-hmm.
and everybody comes out ahead.
Mm-hmm. A guide, not a guru, is
Yes.
one of my like teaching kind of philosophies. So yeah, I always keep that in mind. Okay, so you can find the podcast information at eslactivity.org/podcast. And you can also find me there with all the links to my socials like YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Pinterest, all that. Jennifer is at teachtravellearn.com. And if you will leave us a review wherever you like to listen to this, like on Apple or not Apple, iTunes or like Google Play or just wherever you listen to podcasts, leave us a review and we would really, really appreciate it. And in that review, if you have any kind of ideas for topics that you'd like to hear, we'd love to hear about that and do that. Yeah, so I think that's all for us. Thanks for listening, everyone. And I will talk to you later.
All right. Bye.